What if a book from the late 1400s decides your guilt before you speak? Malleus Maleficarum tells judges women are lustful and deceptive, so herbs, midwifery, even tears become clues, and you never see charges. Today, I'll show you what the Inquisition did to accused women, worse than death, and how a holy room turns into trap. Let's find out. A lot of witch trials start with basic, everyday problems, like a sick cow, spoiled beer, or a neighbor who feels disrespected. So why does one bad week turn into a death case? In many villages around 1600, people connect misfortune to someone they already dislike, and that usually points at a woman who lives on the edge of local life, older, poorer, or socially isolated. Across Europe, from about 1400 to 1775, courts prosecute around 100,000 people for witchcraft, and around 40,000 to 60,000 end up dead. Here is the part that shapes everything. Roughly 3/4 to 5/5 of defendants are women, and many already carry a reputation for being difficult or different. Bad luck becomes a social weapon, and once the story starts moving, it can feel impossible to stop. Historians keep finding the same pattern in records. Accusations often grow out of small disputes over butter and milk, rent, inheritance, or unpaid debts. Think about it. If two households fight over money, and then a child gets a fever, who looks guilty in a town that already believes in curses? The target tends to be the person people already gossip about, because that rumor feels like an answer. You can see how sharp this gets in specific places. On the Channel Island of Jersey, records show 65 accused, nearly 90% women, with 33 deaths and 8 banishments. In the Catalan town of Sant Feliu Sasserra, between 1618 and 1648, 23 women face charges and at least 6 get hanged on a hill outside town. Those numbers come from small communities, which means the accusations hit close, neighbor against neighbor, sometimes family against family. Once a rumor sticks, every normal detail gets reread. A midwife who sees too many tragic births can get treated like a cause, not a helper. A widow who argues back can get framed as unnatural. And manuals like Malleus Maleficarum feed the bias by claiming women are more lustful, more changeable, and more likely to deceive. One rumor turns into a ready-made script, and the next people to enter the story arrive with authority, paperwork, and power. That shift is where life gets shredded. Once church courts step in, the vibe changes fast. Gossip turns into procedure, and procedure creates a path where the outcome already feels chosen. In Catholic regions, inquisitors claim authority to hunt heresy, and witchcraft gets treated as heresy once theologians link it to a devil pact. That link matters because it pushes the case from bad neighbor to enemy of God, and that raises the stakes for everyone watching. The court often walks in carrying a printed blueprint. Malleus Maleficarum, printed in the late 1400s, lays out how to investigate witches and insists women are especially dangerous. It claims women talk too much, chase pleasure, and bend toward disbelief, which makes them easier targets for demons. So when an accused woman enters the room, the judges see a theory they already trust, not a person they know. Interrogations usually start with simple facts: name, family, church attendance. Then the questions slide into traps. Did she argue with a neighbor about rent? Does she use herbs? Has she worked as a midwife? Has she talked about strange dreams? Each answer can be flipped. If she helps with births, the fear becomes she offers babies to demons, which Malleus spells out as a suspicion aimed at midwives. If she knows basic remedies, it can be framed as forbidden magic. Normal skills get recast as evidence. The power gap sits in every line of the interview. Educated men quote canon law and theology, while she tries to explain herself in everyday language. Who decides what sounds honest? The court does. In some tribunals, she does not even see the full written accusations, only a vague summary, which means she cannot answer specific claims. Hidden charges keep her off balance. Even her emotions get twisted. If she stays calm, the court can read it as hardness of heart. If she cries, they can frame it as the devil shaking her. They also pressure her with claims that other women have already confessed and named her. In panic years, that can be partly true because people under pressure do name others. During the Würzburg trials of 1627 to 1629, waves of accusations swept up hundreds of people, including children, and each confession strengthened the court's belief in a secret conspiracy. Mass panic becomes its own engine. If you're into this story, hit subscribe and tap like right now, because the next twist is about to change how you see everything. Once the court starts thinking in that engine-driven way, it begins hunting proof, and that is when the process turns colder and more mechanical. Here is what makes these trials feel so rigged. In many regions, the judge acts as investigator and decides in the same case. That inquisitorial model means suspicion can snowball without a strong outside check. Once officials believe a woman might be a witch, the law offers tools that push toward confession, and confession becomes the center of the whole system. Courts treat rumors, quarrels, and strange events as half-proof. Legal scholars argue that when half-proof exists, torture can be used to reach full proof. On paper, torture is supposed to be limited and controlled. Yet the minute the case hits that stage, her entire life gets picked apart. A stillborn child from 10 years earlier can return as an accusation. A neighbor's accident can get pulled into the story. A storm that ruined crops can become a sign. Old memories turn into fresh weapons. Officials often describe all of this as religious care. They say confession purifies the soul and punishment protects the community. The language sounds noble, even therapeutic, like removing poison from a body. But look at who gets targeted most often. Across Europe, about 75 to 80% of those accused or executed for witchcraft are female, and many are widows, single women, or healers whose independence already irritates neighbors. Gender bias is baked into the case before the first question lands. The trial can also swallow a family's material life. In many places, witchcraft and heresy cases connect with property confiscation, especially where towns or local lords share in the proceeds. One accusation can strip a house, livestock, and tools, leaving children and relatives in poverty. The court can frame that as deterrence, a warning that sorcery costs everything. Money flow can align with moral language, and that creates ugly incentives. Courts also want a clean story that fits theology. They prefer confessions that include a pact with the devil, a night meeting, a harmful spell, maybe a blasphemous act. If her real life does not match that script, pressure can keep building until it does. That is the trade-off. Lived reality matters less than a confession that matches expectations. Story beats become stronger than truth. Once the system is built around confession, denial stops working like a normal defense. The court begins reading innocence as stubbornness, and that is where the woman's words start losing their meaning. A normal person thinks, if I tell the truth clearly, that should protect me. So when she says, I am innocent, why does the room react like it proves something? In many legal manuals and theological arguments, refusal to confess gets framed as stubbornness, and stubbornness gets linked to the devil's influence. That logic flips the case upside down because it makes denial part of the evidence. Some places do acquit people, and that matters. In England, records across the whole period show that about a quarter of those tried for witchcraft end up executed. That means many people face trial and still survive, which tells you outcomes vary by region and moment. Local law and local panic levels matter. Yet in heavy panic periods and in Inquisition-style settings, denial can turn dangerous. Theologians argue the devil gives witches unnatural strength to hide the truth. So holding firm becomes proof that something dark clings to her. You can hear the trap, right? If she confesses, she brands herself. If she refuses, they say her refusal confirms guilt. No safe answer exists inside that frame. Interrogators also use questioning tricks that create contradictions on purpose. They ask the same question in slightly different words, then treat any mismatch as a lie. They introduce made-up details and watch her face. They claim another woman already placed her on a Sabbath, and in large hunts, people under pressure do name others, so the line between fear-driven claims and facts can blur. Forced names become fuel. Her options keep shrinking. Refuse to confess and risk more torture and a harsher death. Confess and accept the most feared crime in the community. Judges talk about free confession, yet they also push spiritual pressure, promising repentance may save her soul, and hinting that cooperation might reduce harm to her family. Spiritual leverage gets used like a tool. There is also regional nuance that matters for accuracy. In parts of Spain, inquisitors later treat many witchcraft accusations with skepticism and prefer penances over executions, which limits the number of burnings compared with some German or French territories. That difference shows the system is not one single machine everywhere. Policy shifts can change body counts. Still, for the woman trapped in a stone cell, nuance can feel pointless. Her words carry too little weight against a system built to demand a specific story. Once officials decide pain will unlock that story, the case moves into its most brutal phase. Torture in witch trials follows a grim kind of planning. It is not random rage. It is a method meant to force a confession that matches what the court already believes. In many jurisdictions, torture can begin once there is half-proof, and legal rules often insist it must happen without shedding blood, which pushes interrogators toward devices that crush, stretch, or suffocate instead. Bloodless torture still destroys people. The goal goes beyond injury. Interrogators want a broken story. Sessions are designed to push her mind into a place where any narrative that satisfies the court feels safer than silence. Manuals even discuss pausing torture and resuming it later while claiming it counts as one continuous session, so officials can claim they follow limits while extending suffering far past what a person expects. Legal loopholes keep pain going. Pain is only one part of the pressure stack. Isolation and sleep deprivation weaken judgment. Threats against children can hit harder than the rack itself. Confessors can enter the cell urging her to tell the truth for the sake of her soul, which means the message comes from chains and from religious authority at the same time. Two pressures hit in sync, and that can break resistance fast. What kind of confession comes out of that environment? Often, it matches printed fantasies in unsettling ways. Historians note that torture produces long, detailed stories of Sabbaths, flying, and demonic sex that line up closely with what appears in works like Malleus Maleficarum. That close match suggests interrogators feed key details, then record them as if they came spontaneously from the accused. Scripted details can end up labeled admissions. Once she signs, the damage keeps spreading. The confession can describe her as a baby killer, a poisoner, or a lover of demons, and that text can follow her even if she survives. Neighbors can treat the paper as reality because the court's record carries authority. Paper truth beats lived truth in a community that trusts official ink. For officials, a confession equals success. It validates the theory, justifies the process, and allows the court to move toward sentencing. It also sets up the next cruelty because confession opens a so-called spiritual choice, where her body, her name, and her afterlife get pushed into one impossible bargain. Once confession is on the table, the court frames the next step as a spiritual decision. Accept the court's story and repent, and judges say God may forgive her soul. Refuse, and they warn she faces eternal separation from God as a heretic. That framing matters because many accused women truly believe in heaven and hell, and the same men controlling food and water also claim control over confession, absolution, and last rites. Religious control becomes direct leverage. Think about the pressure stack here. Fear of more torture sits on one side. Fear of public shame sits on another. Fear of divine punishment sits underneath both. The court can present repentance as a rescue, even while it keeps the woman trapped in chains. Fear triangle keeps tightening. In some regions, courts offer a harsh deal. A confessed witch may receive a less agonizing death, such as strangling before burning, or even a non-capital sentence like flogging, exile, or lifelong imprisonment. A woman who keeps claiming innocence can face a full public execution method like slow burning. The message becomes simple: sacrifice your name to protect your soul. Name trade becomes the bargain. Surviving statements show how messy this looks in real life. Some women say they confess so their children avoid torture. Some say they sign because pain never stops. Some retract confessions once torture ends, then face pressure to repeat them again. That back and forth tells you confession often reflects coercion more than truth. Retracted confessions expose the system. From the outside, people can treat this like a legal puzzle. From inside the cell, it feels like a hostage situation using religion. Her words become ransom. Her identity becomes a bargaining chip. And once the court has a confession, it often wants more than a single guilty name. That next demand changes her role from defendant to tool. Courts often push confessed witches to identify accomplices, Sabbath partners, or anyone linked to spells. So even if she thinks confession ends the nightmare, the process can expand through her, pulling more names into the record. Expanding list becomes the court's next prize. The moment she names someone else, even under agony, the case stops being about her alone. It becomes a network hunt. That is where logic turns into a closed circle, where every reaction can be twisted into proof, and every scream can be filed as confirmation. Once torture enters the case, courts often demand names. Who else attended the Sabbath? Who helped cast spells? Who received harmful magic? Under agony, people reach for familiar faces, neighbors, relatives, rivals, sometimes even priests. The court then treats those names as leads, even when they come from a mind trying to escape pain. Named accomplices can be manufactured. This is where the logic turns into a trap you can never win. If she screams, officials can claim a demon is leaving her. If she stays calm, they can claim the devil hardens her heart. If she hesitates, they can claim he blocks her tongue. Texts like Malleus Maleficarum encourage the idea that women are especially open to demonic control, which makes every emotional response easy to relabel as supernatural evidence. Closed logic protects the court from doubt. Once a few names enter the record, the system can spiral. Würzburg shows what that spiral looks like. During the Würzburg trials of 1627 to 1629, waves of accusations sweep up hundreds of people, including children. Each confession strengthens the belief that a hidden conspiracy exists, and each accused person can be pressured to name more. Lists grow fast, and the very size of the list gets treated as proof that the threat is real. Würzburg panic feeds itself. Here is the key trade-off. The court claims torture reveals truth, yet torture also creates incentives to say whatever the interrogator expects. That means the evidence can reflect the method more than the reality. When judges present a growing web as confirmation, they may be pointing at a structure their own process built. Method-made evidence can look convincing on paper. The accused woman's case stops being personal. Her confession becomes a tool to keep the machinery moving. Even if she dies or disappears into prison, the written record stays behind, and it can be used against others later. Enduring records outlive the person. Some people assume death ends the suffering. Yet for many women, the court chooses punishments that keep them alive while stripping away dignity, security, and community. That is why survival can become its own sentence. The next step is less visible than an execution, but it can drag on for years, and it often leaves families wrecked in slow motion. So if you want to understand the cruelty fully, you have to look past the flames and focus on the penalties that keep a woman breathing while removing everything that makes life feel like life. Public executions get remembered because they are dramatic and visible. Yet many condemned women receive penalties that stretch suffering over years. Inquisition records include public flogging, forced wearing of shame garments, lifelong confinement in remote convents, or imprisonment in cells with minimal light. Long penalties can grind a person down in private, day after day. Spain offers a clear example of punishment as public theater. Autos de fe parade penitents in front of crowds. Some wear yellow tunics called sanbenitos, decorated with flames or demons, and their names and offenses appear on lists posted in churches. Even when the court spares a life, the person becomes a walking warning sign. Public labeling follows her into normal streets. Material losses often hit just as hard as physical punishment. Property confiscation can accompany heresy and witchcraft sentences, shifting houses, fields, tools, and livestock into the hands of the crown, the church, or local lords. For a peasant family, losing tools and land can push them from survival into desperation overnight. A woman who returns from prison may find children placed as servants because no household economy remains to support them. Property seizure reshapes futures. The damage can also spread beyond one lifetime. A 2021 economic study on long-run effects linked to Spanish Inquisition persecution finds that municipalities with more persecution still show lower incomes, lower education, and lower social trust centuries later. That kind of finding points to fear and dispossession that keep shaping community behavior long after the trials end. Lower social trust can become a legacy. On the ground, survival can feel like exile inside the same town. Neighbors can cross themselves as she passes. Old friends can look away. Children can repeat insults learned from adults who claim they are protecting purity. Her body stays alive, yet the social life that made survival meaningful can collapse completely. Social exile becomes part of the sentence, and the harm rarely stops with the person sentenced. Once a household loses property and status, the people who suffer next are the children. They inherit a name marked by the court, and they inherit poverty created by confiscation, and both can follow them for years. So the real question becomes, what happens to a child who grows up under a label that the whole town treats like fact, even when the child has done nothing at all? When a mother gets condemned, the paperwork ends for the court, yet consequences keep running for her children. Picture a small town where everyone knows the sentence. Adults lower their voices when a child enters. Parents steer their kids away. A family name becomes a warning label people share without even speaking. In places like Jersey and Sant Feliu Sasserra, local memory holds on to accusation stories for generations because the communities are small and the events are public. Long memories become part of daily life. Stigma also changes practical options. Families of condemned witches often lose property through confiscation, which pushes children into farm service, apprenticeships, or begging. That drop in status matters beyond money. It signals to everyone that the family line is tainted, and that idea can shape who will hire them, who will marry them, and who will protect them when another rumor starts. Status collapse limits choices. The community-level effects can last a long time, and research supports that pattern. The 2021 study on long-run effects tied to Spanish Inquisition persecution finds that heavier persecution links to lower income, lower education, and lower social trust centuries later. If fear and suspicion can persist at the town level, You can see how a single family can carry that distrust like an inherited weight. Generational distrust becomes normal. Sometimes the stigma loops back into the courts. In large panics, records can show family networks swept up together. During Würzburg's late 1620s wave, execution lists include mothers, daughters, and even young sons linked by surnames. Once a household sits under suspicion, each new misfortune can reactivate the old charge, and a child can grow up knowing that any accident might get blamed on their bloodline. Family targeting can spread. There is also a psychological trade-off that rarely gets said out loud. Families learn that speaking about the condemned mother can trigger attention, so silence becomes a survival strategy. That silence can protect in the short term, yet it can also trap grief and shame inside the household for years. Learned silence shapes identity. This is why the story hurts beyond death itself. The court rewrites a mother into a tale about evil, and that tale gets repeated around her children until it feels like their destiny. And when you see how easily a community can turn a woman into a symbol, it becomes easier to notice modern versions of the same pattern, even without courts, racks, or flames. People throw around witch hunt today, usually meaning a public pile-on. That phrase exists for a reason, because the historical pattern has a recognizable shape. Yet it helps to keep the scale clear. Historians stress that early modern Europe never targeted most women. Over 99.9% of women alive during the height of witch trials never entered a courtroom. So what explains the smaller group who did get targeted? Selection pattern matters. Across Europe and New England, around 70 to 80% of those tried for witchcraft are women, and in some places the share rises to 75% or more. That does not mean every independent woman gets attacked. It means the legal and social systems repeatedly pick the same kind of target under stress, often women already seen as outsiders, burdens, or threats to social control. Gender skew is measurable. Printed ideology supports that targeting. Malleus Maleficarum claims women are more carnal, more prone to belief, and more likely to serve demons. Strip away the medieval language and the move becomes familiar. Define a group as naturally dangerous, then treat suspicion as common sense. Once that happens, evidence standards can drop, and accusations can feel self-explanatory to the crowd. Group suspicion becomes the shortcut. Modern life has no Inquisition court dragging women to stone cells with racks and ropes. Yet you still see online dog piles, moral panics, and selective outrage landing hardest on women judged for sexuality, motherhood, or public speech. The tools changed, the speed increased, and the audience got bigger. Yet the social instinct to police women through shame still shows up. Scholars discuss gendered violence in memory, where older witch stereotypes keep shaping how people talk about older women, midwives, or women in religious spaces. Memory bias can keep working. Some communities try to confront that history directly. Sant Feliu Sasserra runs an interpretation center of witchcraft, telling visitors about the 23 women prosecuted there between 1618 and 1648. Places like Salem also turn trials into cautionary lessons about mass fear rather than celebrations of faith. Public memory can change direction. So when you see a new scandal about a woman in your feed, what do you do first? Do you assume an old script explains her? Or do you ask who benefits from calling her dangerous? That question breaks the pattern. You just saw how one accusation can erase a life on paper and in memory, but one layer stays hidden. Click the next video now. Another story is waiting there.